In the early 1800s, two empires stood as titans, each dominating their respective corners of the world: the ancient and venerable Qing dynasty in China, a land steeped in tradition and imperial power. And on the other side of the globe, the rapidly expanding British Empire, a force driven by industrial might and colonial ambition. China, with its long history of cultural and economic dominance, proudly and perhaps somewhat arrogantly called itself the Celestial Empire, firmly believing it was the undisputed centre of civilization, the source of all wisdom and culture. Britain, on the other hand, fueled by the relentless engine of the Industrial Revolution and an insatiable appetite for global trade, aggressively sought new markets to exploit and resources to plunder, extending its reach across the oceans. Inevitably, their paths would soon collide, drawn together by the irresistible forces of commerce and imperial ambition. This collision would ignite a conflict that would fundamentally reshape China, leaving an indelible mark on its history and its relationship with the world. The underlying cause of this clash? It wasn't a dispute over land, nor a holy war driven by religious fervour, but something far more insidious: a highly addictive drug, opium. Britain had developed an insatiable craving for Chinese tea, a beverage that had become a staple of British society. However, China, confident in its own resources and industries, desired very little from Britain, resulting in a significant trade imbalance that favoured the Chinese. In a desperate attempt to rectify this imbalance and fill its coffers, Britain, through the British East India Company, began selling opium to China, engaging in an illegal and profoundly destructive trade that would have devastating consequences for the Chinese population. The Chinese government, recognizing the immense harm caused by opium addiction, made valiant attempts to stop the trade, but Britain, determined to protect its lucrative trade and expand its influence, responded with overwhelming force, escalating the situation toward war. The resulting opium wars were about far more than just drugs and trade imbalances. They represented a blatant attempt at imposing foreign will and control over China, undermining its sovereignty and challenging its long-held traditions. This marked the beginning of what would become known as China's Century of Humiliation, a period of intense foreign interference and national shame. The wars starkly exposed China's vulnerability to Western military power and technological advancements, shattering its image of invincibility. Defeat at the hands of the British forced China to sign a series of unfair and unequal treaties, ceding valuable land and territories, paying exorbitant sums of money as reparations, and relinquishing significant control over its own affairs, severely compromising its sovereignty. The memory of these wars and the subsequent humiliation still deeply shapes China's view of the West and its place in the world. The Opium Wars were more than just military conflicts. They represented a fundamental clash of cultures, values and worldviews, pitting a self-sufficient agrarian empire against an aggressively expansionist industrial power, demanding open markets and access to its resources. Britain, while claiming to champion the principles of free trade and open commerce, ultimately forced a devastating trade upon China, a trade built on addiction, exploitation, and immense human suffering. Understanding this dark chapter in history is crucial for understanding the roots of modern tensions and complexities in the relationship between China and the West. In this documentary, we'll delve deep into the historical context and explore the underlying causes that led to these wars, examining the economic motives, the imperial ambitions, and the key events that shaped the conflict, from the initial skirmishes to the major battles that determined the outcome. We will also analyse the long-lasting consequences of the Opium Wars, examining their profound impact on China's society, economy, and political landscape. The Opium Wars were not just a series of battles and military engagements. They represented a pivotal turning point in world history, marking the decline of one empire and the rise of another. They serve as a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked greed and the pursuit of profit at any cost, and the devastating impact of addiction on individuals, families, and entire societies. For China, the Opium Wars represent a deep national trauma, a wound that continues to shape its identity and its relationship with the world today. Understanding this chapter of history is absolutely key to understanding China's modern identity. its national character, and its aspirations for the future. So let's embark on this journey together and see how this tragic story unfolded, revealing the complex interplay of power, greed, and cultural misunderstanding that led to the Opium Wars. In the early 1800s, the Qing dynasty ruled a vast, wealthy, and self-sufficient empire. China saw itself as the Middle Kingdom, the center of civilization, surrounded by barbarians. The emperor, the son of heaven, ruled with a divine mandate. Foreign trade was tightly controlled, confined to the port of Canton with strict rules for outsiders. Western merchants could not enter the city, learn Chinese, or bring families. All business went through the Kohong, a group of licensed Chinese merchants. The Canton system limited foreign influence and reinforced Chinese superiority. China produced everything it needed. British goods found few buyers. But beneath this confidence, the Qing faced growing problems: corruption, overpopulation, and a stagnant military. The army was large but outdated, and China had no modern navy. The Qing's pride blinded them to the rapid changes beyond their borders. They were unprepared for the storm approaching from the west. For Britain, trade was power, and tea was an obsession. By the 1800s, tea was a daily staple in Britain, fueling a massive trade with China. The British East India Company shipped millions of pounds of tea from Canton, but China bought little in return. This created a huge trade deficit, draining British silver reserves. Diplomatic missions, like the McCartney mission, failed to open China's markets. The emperor dismissed British goods as unnecessary. Frustrated, the East India Company turned to opium grown in British-controlled India. Opium was addictive and illegal in China, but demand soared. The company smuggled opium into China, reversing the flow of silver. Britain would now pay for tea with addiction, not silver. This set the stage for a crisis that would engulf both empires. The pursuit of profit would soon lead to war. The British opium trade, a dark chapter in history, began to unfold with devastating consequences for China. It was a calculated strategy, driven by economic interests, that would forever alter the course of Chinese society. It devastated China, leaving a trail of addiction, poverty, and social decay in its wake. The impact was felt across all levels of society, from bustling port cities to remote rural villages. Smugglers, often aided by bribed officials who turned a blind eye to the illicit trade, flooded the country with the highly addictive drug, turning a nation into addicts. The sheer volume of opium entering China was staggering. Opium addiction initially spread among the elites, the wealthy and privileged, who had the means to afford the expensive habit. But it quickly trickled down to the labourers, the working class, and the peasantry, ensnaring them in its grip. It was destroying families, tearing them apart, and weakening the very fabric of Chinese society. The social consequences were far-reaching and devastating. Opium dens, havens of addiction and despair, appeared everywhere, becoming a common sight in cities and towns. Even the army and government officials fell victim to the allure of opium, compromising their ability to serve and protect. The economic impact on China was severe. Silver, the lifeblood of the Chinese economy, now flowed steadily out of the country to pay for the opium, causing a crippling financial crisis. The value of silver soared, making it increasingly difficult for ordinary citizens to pay their taxes, and widespread unrest began to bubble to the surface as people grew desperate. The relentless opium trade threatened to bankrupt the entire empire, pushing it to the brink of collapse. The emperor's court was in turmoil, desperately debating potential solutions to this growing crisis. Should they legalize and tax the opium trade, bringing it under government control, or should they ban it outright and launch a massive crackdown on smugglers and users alike? Most of the court officials and scholars saw opium as a moral poison, slowly but surely destroying China's strength and vitality. By the late 1830s, with each passing day, the crisis had become so severe and so widespread that the Daoguang emperor finally decided that he had to take decisive action. He knew that he needed to appoint a strong and incorruptible leader, someone who could effectively confront the foreign drug trade head-on. The fate of the entire empire Its future prosperity and stability would soon rest on the shoulders of this one man. The stage was now set for a dramatic and potentially explosive confrontation in Canton, the center of the opium trade. China, pushed to its limits, was finally about to fight back against the foreign powers that had been poisoning its people and plundering its wealth. In 1838, the Daoguang Emperor, facing a severe national crisis, appointed Lin Zexu, a man known for his unwavering resolve and incorruptibility. His mission was clear: to end the rampant opium crisis that was devastating the nation both economically and socially. The emperor entrusted Lin with the authority to take whatever measures necessary to eradicate this menace. Lin, known for his integrity and unyielding commitment to justice, was seen as the only man capable of tackling such a formidable challenge. He arrived in Canton, the epicenter of the opium trade, with a firm determination to eradicate the drug trade and restore order to the region. He understood the gravity of the situation and the immense pressure upon him. Lin, recognizing the source of the problem, appealed directly to Queen Victoria, urging her to stop British merchants from engaging in this destructive trade. He hoped for a diplomatic solution, but his plea was ignored and received no reply from the British monarch. Undeterred, Lin took decisive action. He demanded that all foreign merchants surrender their entire stock of opium. Furthermore, he insisted they sign a legally binding pledge, promising never to trade in opium again, under penalty of severe punishment. The merchants, however, led by Charles Elliot, the British Superintendent of Trade, staunchly refused to comply with Lin's demands. They were confident that Lin would eventually back down under pressure from the powerful British Empire. Instead of relenting, Lin took an even bolder step. He ordered a complete blockade of the foreign factories in Canton. This action effectively cut off all supplies to the factories, trapping hundreds of foreign merchants and traders inside. After weeks of intense pressure and tense negotiations, the situation reached a critical point. Elliot, realizing the gravity of the situation and the futility of resistance, finally relented and ordered the surrender of over 20,000 chests of opium. Lin then orchestrated a dramatic public display of destruction, a symbolic act to demonstrate China's resolve. The confiscated opium was meticulously mixed with salt and lime, rendering it unusable, before being dumped into the sea, a powerful statement against the drug trade. For China, this was a moment of immense national pride, a moral victory against a deeply harmful trade. However, for Britain, the destruction of their valuable commodity was seen as an act of intolerable outrage. British merchants, who had profited immensely from the opium trade, and influential politicians back home, viewed Lin's actions with growing anger and resentment. They framed it as a direct attack on their fundamental property rights and a grave insult to British honour and prestige. In London, the calls for a military response grew louder and more insistent, fueled by powerful commercial interests. Lin's bold stand, intended to protect his nation, would inadvertently trigger a global conflict with far-reaching consequences. The destruction of the opium in Canton was not just a local event, it was a pivotal turning point in global history. Britain, determined to protect its commercial interests and uphold its national honour, prepared to respond with overwhelming force. The stage was set, and the First Opium War, a conflict that would reshape the relationship between China and the West, was about to begin. China's courageous resistance, though morally justified, would soon be met with the full might of the British Empire's naval and military power. The eyes of the world were now fixed on China, as the unfolding events promised to alter the balance of power on a global scale. In 1840, Britain sent a powerful naval force to China. Steam-powered gunboats and advanced artillery gave Britain a decisive edge. The British bypassed Chinese armies, striking at key ports and rivers. The Qing military, with outdated weapons, was helpless against British technology. The British captured cities, cut off vital grain supplies, and threatened Beijing. Facing disaster, the Qing court surrendered. The war exposed China's weakness and shattered imperial confidence. Britain now dictated the terms of peace. In 1842, China was forced to sign the Treaty of Nanjing. The treaty imposed harsh terms, a huge indemnity, 5 open ports, and the cession of Hong Kong to Britain. British merchants gained new freedoms, and extraterritoriality placed them above Chinese law. Tariffs were fixed low, crippling China's ability to protect its industries. The treaty did not mention opium, but the trade continued and even grew. The Qing government's authority was shattered. Other Western powers soon demanded similar privileges. The unequal treaties era had begun. China's humiliation was complete, but the West wanted more. Another war was on the horizon. The Treaty of Nanjing failed to satisfy Western ambitions. Britain and France wanted and loss of sovereignty. The legacy of these wars would haunt China for generations, still shape China's identity and its relations with the world.